What's up, everybody? It's your boy SEADUB. Welcome back to the arena. Hey guys, I hope y'all are having a great day. About to come over and give y'all some really good topics today that we're going to discuss. I'd like to talk about something that happened to me during my college years, which is about 10 years ago now. I find it a really interesting point in time because my younger brother is exactly in the same spot that I would have been in back then as far as time. He's on his second semester of college. This happened during my second year of college, and pretty much what happened spurred me to quit going to college, quit working for the man, at a young age. And what happened was really messed up. It involves the police, it involves the employer, and really I was done really wrong in this situation, guys. So I went to college. I was pursuing a degree in computer science and in biology as well at the same time, and I really liked learning. I was actually on a full ride scholarship for a while because I won a Jeopardy match. I was actually on the quiz bowl team in high school. We won state championships and stuff like that. I'm definitely no dummy, and I used those skills to my best advantage. While I worked in school, I was a level 2 pharmacy tech, and I had worked my way up into doing that. That was my first job out of high school, and I really enjoyed it. I was going to school for biology and stuff, so that felt like right in line with that type of stuff. And I thought maybe, it would be something I wanted to do in the future. And I had a great group of pharmacists, at this small family pharmacy that I worked at that really mentored me and really, gave me the tools to be successful while I was going to school, and as well as exploring, my abilities while I was learning in that field. Pretty much got to do everything that they would do. They would just sign off on it at the end of it, other than, counseling patients on medications and stuff like that. But I really enjoyed that job. I really enjoyed it up until the day it all got shit on. It was a beautiful Friday afternoon in the spring of 2017, I believe. I was real familiar with all the police in this town because they would come through and, either get their medication or stop by and talk to us because, this is a small town thing. This wasn't in the town that I'm living in now. It was in another small town, a much smaller town. But the police came in this Friday, and I thought it was business as usual. I said hello to the officer because I knew the guy, and he asked to speak with the owner. Well, we had just changed ownership, and some guy from out of town had bought the place, and people of the town weren't familiar with him or anything like that. And so him and the police officer go into the back. They go into the back and they have a discussion, probably for about 10 minutes or so. Well, this owner, he comes out, he starts talking with me and stuff, and the cop's still back there in the back, and he's like, the cop wants to talk to you for a little bit. I'm thinking everything is all good because I know the cop. Yeah, I know the cop, and the new owner had been pretty cool so far and stuff, but the owner seemed really shaken for some reason. And I always kind of regarded this man as, kind of feeble and stuff, so I guess the cop might have intimidated him or something like that. So I go into this back storage area where the cop is, and there's no cameras recording, nothing like that. He's got a notebook out. Well, he starts asking me all these questions, and it's really personal questions, and I didn't understand why. I was just 19 years old or so, and maybe 20 years old, and I didn't understand why I was being asked these questions. He asked me a lot of questions about my family, who I live with, our background. He asked me questions like, did I ever go hungry at night or something like that? Asking about the things I had and possessions and stuff like that. Do I have the things I want? He's asking me if I've ever needed to steal anything to get by or anything like that. Told the officer pretty point blank, I'm like, I don't mean to offend you or anything like that, but I come from a pretty well-off family and stuff, and I've never had to steal for anything in my life, so that's pretty out of the question. I don't live in a situation like that. And he says, okay, I'm gonna get down to the brass tacks of things. There's a client that has accused you of stealing money off their credit card through the drive-through window. And he has me explain the whole point of sale system and stuff, and how we would take a customer's payment if they paid with card from the window. And I'm like, everything is under video surveillance, and we never write down any of these customers' information, and that's just out of the question that we wouldn't steal something from a customer. Keep in mind, this is a small town, probably kind of a you know, a bit of a redneck place for lack of better words, and I'm the only black person that worked there or had ever worked there. The conversation with me and the officer pretty much ends with him saying, we're going to place you under formal investigation, you know, don't go too far away from, you know, our city and stuff like that, because you're going to be under investigation and we'll probably be calling you back for further questioning and stuff like that. And I'm like, you know, all right, that's fine, you know, because I know I'm innocent and I'm not thinking too much of it really. I go through the rest of the workday, and my coworkers that are very supportive, you know, and I thought they were pretty good friends. They're shocked and they're asking me, you know, why did this happen? You know, what did the cops want? How come they only talk to you? And that became a big question for the rest of the day, is how come they only talk to you? They didn't ask anybody else about what was going on. We finish out our shift for the day and go home. And of course, when I get home, the first thing I do is explain to my mom and my stepdad what happened. And as I'm explaining to them what happened, you know, they're reiterating the same question. How come this was only discussed with you? How come the cops didn't discuss this with anybody else in the workplace? Only you. Why did they single you out? My parents are straight up appalled that this happened like this with my mom and my stepdad. So my stepdad ends up going down to the police department, you know, right then and there, pretty much. And he asked them, you know, what the deal is and why it's like that. You know, ask them some more questions. They tell him pretty much, you know, it's going to be an ongoing investigation. Of course, he can't do anything about it, but he, you know, he's a real man, so he's taking up for me and stuff and not letting them pick on me like that. And, you know, for the next couple of days, they've got police cars, you know, parked on the block outside of our house and stuff. Never pull me over or anything like that, but they're definitely scoping us out, of course. That happened on a Friday. That Saturday I was supposed to go back to work. I always worked Saturdays. I decided, you know, since the company couldn't, or since the owner could not stand up for me against the cops and would allow that audacity, you know, to take place and stuff, I didn't want to work for people like that anymore. And I'm not tooting my horn too hard or anything, but I know I did the majority of the stuff that went on there. I worked full time there. Like I said, I did everything. The pharmacist just had to sign off on it at the end of the day and during the processes. So I thought to myself, you know, if I can run your business, I can go and run my own. So that Saturday, I didn't show up for work. Another pharmacist that worked there, she was very supportive. You know, I had worked with her for a long time through the ownership changes and stuff like that. And she was like, you know, give it some time and think about it, you know, because we want you to come back, and, you know, what's going on is wrong. But never any support from the owner, which, you know, that'll tie into the story a little bit later. So a little bit later, you know, a couple of days go by, and one of the police officers comes to the door of my house. Actually, not one of the police officers. It's the same police officer that investigated me at the workplace. He comes to my house and he's asking me a couple questions, you know, and he's like, well, you know, you're no longer at the pharmacy. I said, no. And he said, are you admitting guilt because you quit the job? And I said, absolutely not. I'm just not going to work for a place where they would allow you to do some stuff like that. And he said, okay, the investigation will be ongoing then. I said, all right, you know, I'll cooperate with your investigation, but, you know, I'm not your guy for this. Well, you know, I start doing, you know, my own work and stuff like that, which I'll expand on the stuff that I did in further videos. Right now I'm going to keep this video on this so it doesn't go on too long. One morning I get a call from the police officers. They asked me to come down to the police station. They say, you know, they want to finalize this investigation, pretty much get to the bottom of what's going on and stuff like that. I said, okay, you know, I'll be down there in 5 minutes because, hey, I want to get this shit over with. I'm tired of being investigated. I don't want to feel like a criminal and stuff like that. And obviously it felt very wrong. So I go down to the police station and they bring me back into like this holding cell type thing. I've never been to jail a day in my life, so this is probably the closest I've ever been to that. And he sits me down, he asks me a bunch of questions, and he says, you know, if I can show him a bank statement showing that I never received $500 from a certain bank account or something like that, or a certain credit card. Pretty much they were looking for a wire transfer or something of a specific dollar amount. and they knew what the amount was, that he would clear my name of this case. So I said, okay, give me 10 minutes and I'll be right back. Well, I go down to my bank, ask them for the bank statements. They print me off a notarized copy of the bank statement. I drive back over to the police station, go into the police station, show him the statements. He looks through them. He jokes with me. He's like, man, you like to eat a lot of Chick-fil-A, don't you? And that's true. I do like to eat me some Chick-fil-A. He says that, the officer says that, I'll be cleared of the case. Pretty much, there won't be anything against me for this, and I'm not the guy. And, I'm very respectful about it to the police officer, because I'm sure if he really wanted to do some more Bush League tactics and stuff, I'm sure they could probably do some more, if you acted the wrong way towards them or anything like that. So I was respectful, I didn't act out about it or any type of stuff like that. I just took my L with it and went on about my way with it. That really hurt, because I think it probably took me off my path, being able to work for these companies and stuff like that, and having trust in the company, and really believing in people like that. I think I lost a lot of trust. I lost a lot of belief in certain systems. Definitely lost a lot of belief in the police force and stuff like that, because what happened was really wrong. I've never stolen anything from anybody. I mean, I'm not a criminal guy, that's just not me. In my younger years, I like to smoke a little weed, but I definitely wasn't hurting anybody or harming anything. Sometimes I wonder how things would have turned out without that happening. I probably would have had a lot more drive to stay in school if I had, that full-time job, leaning on me. And like I said, I have full ride scholarships and stuff to school. I finished that semester of school, dropped out, and, went all in on my own business, which between 2017 and probably 2020, 2021, I did it really big. I accomplished a lot of the goals that I had as a child, in 2026 right now, I'm lining myself back up with a lot of that stuff, because I understand, one of the best ways to live a fulfilled life is to do all of the things that you really enjoy and are good at, instead of just sitting there for 40 hours and doing something that they would, force you to do. I'm gonna go hard at everything that I know how to do well. Even if I end up working more hours than that, I would still be a lot more fulfilled than sitting down and doing somebody else's prescribed tasks and stuff like that. If you've ever been in a situation like this, I'd love to hear your story from it. Like I always say, the story is just as important as the glory. So I'm going to keep sharing my story with y'all. I'm going to keep bringing these personal stories and hard topics. And I look forward to sharing this stuff with the world, guys. It's that situation like that showed me, it pretty much kicked me off the porch right there. And it said, you're gonna have to go do your own thing. Life often reminds me, anytime I try to do stuff for other people, they always end up kicking me in the ass. I gotta be my own boss. I gotta be in charge of my destiny. I gotta write my own story. I'm not trying to let somebody else write it for me. And even though all of that was wrong, in a way, I'm still thankful for it today, because it's just one of the things that made me who I am. And I'm not sitting here and crying about it or anything like that. And never really have. Anyways, I'm not going to go on for too long, guys. This has been The Arena with SEADUB. We're going to discuss hard topics. Step into the arena with me. If you found me on here, I love you guys, and I hope you have a great day.